This is the In Focus podcast from The Hindu.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the In Focus podcast. I'm your host, Sampath. Barely a month after Israel rejected a three-phase peace plan brokered by Egypt and Qatar, President Joe Biden has proposed another version of a three-phase peace plan. He has put himself on the line by publicly claiming that it is Israel that has come up with this ceasefire proposal. But Israeli leaders are yet to own up to this proposal and keep repeating the old line that they will not accept any eventuality that leaves Hamas in power in Gaza. But the United States has been circulating a draft resolution among the UN Security Council members asking them to support the Biden ceasefire proposal. So what prompted President Biden to publicize this plan, which doesn't seem to have a full support of Israel itself? And what does this proposal entail, and how likely is Israel to accept it going forward? We discuss all these questions and more in this episode of In Focus, and we have with us Johny, the Hindu's International Affairs editor. Stanley, welcome back to In Focus, and thank you so much for your time again.
Thanks, Sampath. Thanks for having me.
So Stanley, to begin with, can you just give a quick overview of what's the situation like now on the ground in Gaza? We know that there's been assaults happening, military assaults in Rafah. So, and also humanitarian terms, there's a lot of things happening. What is the scene right now?
So, it's been 8 months. Today is 7th of June. So, it's been 8 months since the war began, after Hamas launched its October 7th surprise attack in Israel. And when Israel went into Gaza, we know that the Israelis had said that they wanted to destroy Hamas and they wanted to release all the hostages. They also wanted to bolster Israel's deterrence. And Gaza is a tiny strip of land that is sandwiched between Israel proper and the Mediterranean coast. The first thing Israel did was to impose a blockade. There was a blockade, but impose a siege on Gaza, taking over all the checkpoints except the Rafah crossing. And ever since, Israel has been controlling everything, the movement of things, people, and Israel has been bombarding this region and is also carrying out a full-scale ground invasion. And it's been 8 months. And, in 8 months, if you look at the statistics, the number of bombs Israel had dropped on Gaza is more than the number of bombs Allied forces had dropped in Dresden during the Second World War. And if you look at the casualties, almost 37,000 Palestinians have been killed in 8 months. And Gaza Strip's total population, the pre-war population, is 2.3 million, and almost all of this 2.3 million people have been displaced. And Israel first initially attacked northern Gaza, and then it went to central Gaza, and now the main operations are taking place in the south, the southernmost city of Rafah. So what happened was that when Israel invaded, Gaza City, which is the most populous city center of the entire Gaza Strip, it did that in October 2023, and some 1.3 million people were pushed to the south, and most of them were living in Rafah, and they were living in tent camps, UN shelters, schools, on the streets, etc., etc. So Rafah is kind of an overcrowded open prison now. And since May, Israel has been bombarding Rafah. And these 1.2 million people who are already displaced have been displaced again because of the ongoing Rafah operation. And you can also see just yesterday, a UN-run hospital was bombed in which 40 people were killed. And just 2 weeks ago, a refugee camp, basically a tent city, was bombed by the Israelis in which some 40 people, mostly civilians, elderly, women and children, were killed. And a ground operation is also taking place in Rafah at this point of time, in which dozens of people are being killed almost on a daily basis. President Biden of the United States had earlier said that a full-scale invasion of Rafah would be a red line for him. And if Israel carried out a full-scale invasion on Rafah, Biden said that he would stop sending weapons to Israel. So that is his red line. But Israel has been carrying out a major military offensive in Rafah since May. And the White House now says that it is what is happening, what is going on in Rafah is not a full-scale military operation. So the White House doesn't believe that Netanyahu has breached Biden's red line so that the American weapons would continue to flow into Israel. So this is the gist of what's happening in Gaza at this point of time.
So their definition of it not being a full-scale invasion is just that Israeli ground troops are not marching into Rafah. Is that all it takes to make it a full-scale invasion?
But even if that is the definition, Israeli ground troops are there in Rafah. Israeli tanks are there in central Rafah at this point of time. So we don't know what the White House means by a full-scale invasion, because Israel is bombing Rafah, Israel is invading Rafah, Israeli troops and tanks are there in Rafah, Israeli tanks are there in central Rafah. Rafah's tent camps are being attacked, UN-run schools are being attacked, refugee camps are being attacked, but President Biden doesn't seem to think that this is a full-scale operation.
Right, very interesting that he doesn't seem to think that. Now, but he has come up with this peace proposal, a three-phase peace proposal, which he claims has come from Israel. So I was just curious, what does this peace proposal entail? How is it different from what Egypt and Cairo presented in May, which Hamas had actually accepted but Israel had rejected? And what exactly is this whole deal about claiming that Israel has come up with this proposal?
Yeah, I was just looking at the the three phases of the proposal of both plans. The earlier plan which Hamas had accepted. So we don't have the fine print. We only have reports that are based on the statements given by the administrations. We don't have the exact document to make a thorough analysis of both plans. But looking at what we have on our hands, I think the main difference here is that the previous proposal had insisted on a permanent lasting ceasefire. Here, Biden is a bit ambivalent. So I'll just take you through the proposal to the Biden plan.
I know there are those in Israel who will not agree with this plan and will call for the war to continue indefinitely.
So Biden has proposed this, as you mentioned, the three-phase plan. So as per the Biden plan, in the first phase, there would be a 6-week-long ceasefire, a complete ceasefire, as President Biden said, during which the Israelis and the Palestinians, in this case Hamas, would continue the negotiations. But during this time, in the first phase, what will happen is that Israel would release Palestinian prisoners. There are no specific numbers, but in the previous plan there were specific numbers, and Hamas would also release a number of hostages. Again, no specified numbers here. So it says that Hamas would release the hostages, including women, the elderly, the wounded, etc., etc. So basically, the vulnerable sections of the hostages, some 130 hostages are still in Hamas's captivity. So of these, the vulnerable people would be released, and the Israelis would release Palestinian prisoners, and there would be a ceasefire. And Israel would also allow more humanitarian aid into Gaza Strip. So Biden says, at least 600 trucks of humanitarian aid would be allowed into Gaza. Right now, I think it is 150 to 200 a day, because Israel is controlling all the exit and entry points. So this is the first phase. And in the second phase, all the hostages, including Israeli soldiers and the mortal remains of those who died since October 7, will be released, and the Israelis would release more Palestinian prisoners, and the ceasefire would be extended, and Israel would withdraw from the entire Gaza Strip. So in the first phase, Israel is expected to withdraw from the densely populated regions of Gaza. I think the reference is to Rafah, Han Yunis, Gaza City, etc., etc. So in the second phase, a complete withdrawal of the Israeli troops from the Gaza Strip. And the third phase is about the reconstruction of Gaza. So Biden proposes that Arab countries would come in, international actors would come in, because, if you look at the UN report, more than half of Gaza's buildings have been either completely destroyed or partially damaged. We discussed this earlier. I was in Israel a couple of months ago, and I was talking to Israeli journalists who were covering Gaza, and one of them, who is a right winger, he doesn't hide his political inclinations, and a right wing journalist, and he told me that when you talk about Palestinians being allowed to go back to northern Gaza, what people do not understand is that where will they go back? Because in northern Gaza, this journalist told me that there is not a single building standing. We are talking about Gaza City, which used to be the biggest population center of the Gaza Strip. Israel has practically destroyed everything in Gaza City. And the UN reports, if you look at the UN documents, it says that at least 50% or more than 50% of Gaza's entire buildings have been destroyed or damaged. So reconstruction and redevelopment is a very interesting, very important thing. So this is what they are talking about in phase 3. But the problem here is that Biden's proposal doesn't say that the ceasefire would be permanent, should be permanent. So even if Israel is expected to withdraw their troops, the whole of troops from Gaza Strip in phase 2, Prime Minister Netanyahu says that he reserves the right to go back to Gaza if he wanted to, because his idea is that he would continue to fight, until he achieves his goal, which is the total destruction of Hamas. But Hamas on the other side, Hamas is okay with phase 1 here, I think. 6 weeks ceasefire, releasing hostages, release of prisoners, and Israeli withdrawal from the densely populated regions and allowing more aid trucks into Gaza. But what Hamas wants for a lasting solution is a permanent ceasefire, because Hamas insists that Israel should not come back to Gaza again. And another sticky point here is that in the third phase, once the reconstruction starts, who's going to govern Gaza? Because the Israelis say that not Hamas. Hamas carried out that. Our objective is to destroy Hamas. So we are not going to let Hamas continue to run Gaza. But Hamas is still there, and Hamas is not ready to give up Gaza. So this is another. So these are basically the contentious points. So yeah, but this is what the Biden plan is all about.
Right. And what is this thing about the plan coming from Israel, even though it's Biden's plan?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, but it's possible that the Israelis had authorized the plan. Without that, I doubt whether Biden would have gone public with that. So it's possible that the Israelis and the Americans had discussed it. But maybe I'm speculating here because we don't know. But maybe Netanyahu didn't expect Biden to go public. So they were talking about this. And Biden went public to put pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu. But this has weakened Netanyahu internally. Because if you look at Netanyahu's coalition, we had discussed this earlier. So this is the farthest right-wing government in Israel's history. And Netanyahu's coalition partners, including Itamar Ben-Gvir or Smotrich, they were right-wing racists, right? Ben-Gvir was convicted earlier for racism. And they had made it clear that if Netanyahu is going to end the war, they are going to destroy his government, which means both of them will pull their support. So Netanyahu will lose power unless he gets support from the more moderate or the centrist factions of Israel's polity, which includes, Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid. Okay, it's possible. Theoretically speaking, it's possible that Yair Lapid, who is the main opponent, political rival of Israel, could prop up his government, at least to achieve the peace deal. But Netanyahu will be a prisoner. He will be at the mercy of his own main political rival. And Netanyahu is also very unpopular now, especially after October 7th. There is no opinion poll is suggesting that if there is an election tomorrow, Netanyahu's Likud is going to emerge the largest party. So Netanyahu is on a very sticky ground, So once Biden went public with the plan, and once Netanyahu's own allies started attacking him, saying that if he goes ahead with the ceasefire plan, we are going to pull back from your government, I think now Netanyahu is acting as if he didn't authorize the plan at all. So I think Netanyahu's political survival plays a key role, or it is an impediment for achieving a ceasefire here. Not just me, even President Biden himself suggested that. You go and check Biden's Time magazine interview, in which the interviewer is asking him whether Netanyahu's political survival, his quest for political survival is hindering peace. Biden doesn't say no. Biden says, I refuse to answer the question. And then he adds that, I will quote, the exact quote is that he says he wouldn't comment on that, and then adds, there is every reason for people to draw that conclusion. So basically, the President of the United States is saying that Prime Minister Netanyahu is prolonging the war to preserve his own political position.
Right. So Netanyahu's survival instincts are sort of hindering the peace process here. Okay, that's on one side. What about Biden's survival? I mean, you've got presidential elections coming in later this year. And is that something which is playing on Biden's mind as he sort of pushes his peace proposal? Because would it be accurate to say that the longer this war goes on without a ceasefire, the poorer, the worse it is for Biden's electoral re-election prospects?
Yeah, I guess so, because Biden realizes that his, blank check for Israel has divided his base. Because even now, Biden is not ready to basically revisit his Israel policy, right? American presidents in the past had actually threatened Israel, had actually sent very strong message to Israel, used pressure levers on Israel, including Reagan. Reagan in 1982 said that he would not supply offensive weapons to Israel unless the Israelis withdrew from Lebanon. And even President George W. Bush asked Prime Minister Ariel Sharon to withdraw from West Bank during the Second Intifada. And President Jimmy Carter had put pressure on Israel. Jimmy Carter told the Israelis that I am going to recognize the PLO if you don't agree to hold talks with the Palestinians and indirectly with the Palestinians and directly with the Egyptians in the 1970s. So American presidents had actually used effective pressure tactics in the past. But here, 8 months after the war, after 36,000 people were killed in Palestine, in the Gaza Strip, Biden is still sending weapons to Israel. So Biden's problem is that I think on the one side, he faces the popular pressure, the pressure from the street, the pressure from the progressive sections of the Democratic base. And on the other side, he also wants to balance between his Zionist friends, the influential Israel lobby in the United States, who contribute billions of dollars to his campaign, which is hardly a secret. You can go check the numbers, right? We all can go check the numbers. So Biden doesn't want to completely antagonize the pro-Israel lobby, which is a very powerful institution in itself in Israel, in the United States politics. But at the same time, he also feels the pressure of the street. So Biden is trying to balance here. Balancing as in a such, he doesn't want to revisit his Israel policy. He doesn't want to tell the Israelis that I am pulling the plug. I'm going to stop sending you the weapons. You have to declare a ceasefire. You expect the United States to do that here because the United States is the superpower. It is the big brother, right? And Israel is not. Israel is dependent on the United States, not the other way around. But Biden is still not ready to use the tough talk or the tough act when it comes to Israel's atrocities on the Palestinians. But at the same time, he also knows that his policy, his continuing support for Israel, and Israel's devastating war on the Palestinians is taking a political toll on his campaign. So what he is trying to do is to push for a diplomatic solution without exerting pressure on Israel. So this is why Biden is actually being outwitted by Netanyahu. If you remember last time when the negotiated put forward the ceasefire proposal, what Antony Blinken, Biden's diplomat in chief, what Antony Blinken said that Hamas stands in between peace and Palestinians. And Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh went ahead and said that fine, we are accepting the ceasefire. And what happened? The next day, Israel invaded Rafah. So Biden actually lost his face. And then Biden said that if you invade Rafah, that's my red line. I'm not going to send you weapons. And then Netanyahu expands his operations in Rafah. And now the White House says that, no, this is not a full-scale operation. So my red line still holds. So if you look at the position, Netanyahu is very, very consistent. He says that I will continue the war. And he is continuing the war, irrespective of what the Americans are saying. The United States is changing the goalpost, right? So Biden is basically trying to balance between these two. So he's trying to achieve some ceasefire. He's trying to hold the fighting through diplomacy without actually exerting pressure on Israel or revisiting his policy towards Israel. This has so far been proved ineffectual and incompetent. I don't know what he's going to achieve, whether he's going to achieve something in the future. But so far, Biden's policy has been proved ineffectual.
Has Biden faced any criticism from the Republicans, from Trump on the Israel policy? Because we know that Trump is also equally, if not more, pro-Israel. Has there been any grounds on which the Republicans have been criticizing his Israel policy?
They do. Actually, the right-wing sections of the US polity, they say that Biden is exerting unnecessary pressure on Israel. They also attacked Biden for not doing enough to suppress the street protests, the college protests. And Trump himself said that if he is elected president, he would end the protest within a day. I mean, for him, everything is within a day. He said he would bring the Ukraine war to an end within a day. Anyway, but yeah, that criticism is there. So basically, on the right side, from the right wing, they say that Biden is not doing enough to support Israel because they believe, is within quote unquote, Israel has the right to defend itself, which means Israel should be allowed to continue the war. And on the other side, from the progressive sections of the Democratic Party, they say that Biden's unchecked support for Israel has contributed to this calamity. It's there. But I think President Trump is also, former President Trump is also being a bit tactical here, because if you look at his statements on Palestine and Israel, of course, he is very pro-Israel. And it was Mr. Trump who recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. He moved the American embassy to Jerusalem. And he also recognized Israel's annexation of Syria's Golan Heights. And the ceasefire, the peace proposal for Israel-Palestine, which Trump put forward, the Kushner plan, was a joke. We know that. But here, Trump also realizes that Biden's support for Israel is actually dividing his base. So Trump is being a bit tactical here. So he's not directly, offering support for the continuing war. What he tells Netanyahu, if you look at his public statements, is that Netanyahu should get done with the war at the earliest. So he is trying to fish in the troubled waters, basically. But that doesn't mean that if Trump becomes president, there would be any change in the United States policy. I don't see that happening.
Right. So Biden is trying to balance the two sides here. One is, of course, the Israeli lobby, which has contributed majorly to his campaign and continues to do so. And on the other side, the progressive sections of the Democratic Party, the base, which is a huge component of their support. So we don't know how that's going to play out. But one final dimension of this entire issue, Stanley. So there has also been a lot of international pressure building up on Israel. Biden has been ineffective, yes, but Spain, Ireland, and Norway have formally recognized the Palestinian state. The International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor has applied for the issuing of arrest warrants against Netanyahu and his defense minister. So all these build-up of global pressure tactics, and also, of course, lots of protests outside Israel embassies across Europe. So are these things having the desired effect, or is it being ineffective, or are they being counterproductive, as we are seeing with, the American Congress has just now passed a legislation to sanction the International Criminal Court, which is going the other way from what all the pressure was aimed at achieving.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by the US legislation because, when it comes to Israel, the United States always acts like this. When the ICC issued an arrest warrant against President Putin of Russia, Biden immediately welcomed that. But if you look at the charges, Putin was accused of separating children from their parents. And here, if you look at the charges leveled against Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, it's crimes against humanity and war crimes, indiscriminate attack on the Palestinian civilians, etc., etc. And the United States, the whole political spectrum in the United States is attacking the ICC and not holding Netanyahu accountable. So I'm not surprised by what the Americans are doing. But clearly, I think the continuing war is influencing the international public opinion, because I think the Palestine question can no longer be ignored. This was not the case before October 7th. And Israel is practically an international pariah now, because sans the United States, nobody is publicly offering support for Israel. No major responsible power I'm talking about. Not Argentina.
Indian bombs are dropping on Palestine. We carried a report recently.
I'm not sure about that. I mean, there were reports, but I don't know, because there are all kind of reports. But I don't know whether we are supplying weapons. I don't know. I haven't got any, confirmed reports about that. But clearly, the United States, Biden is keeps sending shells because he had authorized hundreds of shipments since the war began. But yeah, there were reports about drones being sent from India or bombs, but I don't know. We don't have exact details about this. So international pressure is actually being mounted on Israel, and Israel is facing international isolation. And in Europe, if you look at Europe, there is a change in the line of thinking towards the whole issue of Palestine. Norway and Ireland and Spain have already recognized the state of Palestine. Not just that, Spain is also joining the ICJ case against Israel over genocide. Spain has already applied to join the case along with South Africa, which is a remarkable development for a European country to do this. And more European countries. I was talking to a European diplomat, Western European diplomat yesterday, and this ambassador told us that more European countries would follow in the coming weeks. More European countries are planning to recognize the state of Palestine, though they did not specify which countries. I think Slovenia is one of them, but more European countries are planning to do that. So yes, I think.
But I guess among the important countries or the biggest countries, I think Germany would be the least likely to join this, I guess.
That's true. Yeah. That's correct. So yeah, that is the situation now. We have to wait and see how it's being played out, because I would say that Israel, after 8 months of war, Israel hasn't met any of its objectives. And on the other side, Israel has rejuvenated the Palestinian cause. And Israel is facing a lot of international pressure. As of now, Prime Minister Netanyahu doesn't care too much about it. But once Netanyahu is gone, or once the war settled, I think the next Israeli leadership will have to do a lot of soul searching.
Right. And as of now, we don't see the Biden peace plan, which is being circulated in the UN Security Council as a resolution for support. You don't see that sort of generating any kind of forward movement towards a ceasefire?
I mean, we don't know. When Prime Minister Netanyahu's office first initially said that he had authorized broadly the broad plan, and Hamas, the Egyptians say that Hamas is also welcome. Is also open to the idea of holding talks based on the plan. But I am a bit skeptical here because we've been hearing this for the last many weeks. Initially there were multiple plans put forward to both sides, and there were different rounds of talks in Cairo, but nothing had been proved successful. So I don't know. I think it would be premature if we say that this would be a successful plan. I think we have to wait and see.
We have to wait and see. Thank you so much, Stanley. It was a very enlightening conversation. I mean, it's a very sad story so far, and a lot of, inexcusable scale of loss of lives of children, women, and the humanitarian crisis. There is no hope in sight. There is no such kind of resolution to the humanitarian crisis in sight yet. We'll have to wait and watch. Thank you so much once again for joining us. A pleasure talking to you.
Thanks, Sampath. Pleasure was mine.
In Focus will be back soon with analysis of the biggest news issues. In the meantime, you can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and other platforms. Just search for In Focus by The Hindu. We'll see you soon.